Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Welcome to the last session of the ROAR Conference, or at least today's session of ROAR Conference. Before we begin, I want to say thank you to all of our workshop presenters and sponsors. This truly has been a great day. What I know is that we have saved the most important conversation for last. Earlier this year, our colleague, Michelle Robinson, president of the Michigan Council and Supplier IO, released an impact study, which took a hard look at the state of minority businesses, and the findings were unsettling. The study addressed the huge elephant in the room, the issue of the effectiveness and long-term impact of supplier diversity strategies and initiatives. Because of the importance of the study, she only asked that we credit MMSDC and Supplier IO for commissioning and completing the study. The big takeaway from the study was that the current rate of growth, it will take minority businesses 333 years to gain economic parity with white-owned businesses. This is disturbing and frustrating to comprehend. This speaks to the core of our mission of equity through opportunity. It was also the catalyst to create this multi-part discussion with leaders in our network. It's our real world. Stop being nice and start getting real conversation. It's an honest discussion about our various ideas and thoughts that could help create greater parity for historically underrepresented groups that we all support. When we come together collectively as thought leaders, not as council presidents, we have the opportunity to paint the supplier diversity canvas from the lenses of our experiences and expertise. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Alvino Williams, the brains behind this conversation, to kick us off. Al?
Thank you, Valerie. And I would like to say welcome, Terrence and Stan. We are all very familiar with each other, so we're not going to do really formal introductions. We're going to dive right into this. Now, the reason why this is titled "Show Your Hand" is that what we're really trying to do is get everybody along one particular mission around how do we show how our hands are contributing to our economy, are contributing to our communities. Um, so I'm going to start the conversation with this. And I'm teeing off of what Val just pointed out from our colleague Michelle. The reality is there's a wealth inequity, and it's been invisible, and it's been impacting all of us, historically underrepresented ethnic minorities and non-ethnic minorities, and where we live, work, and play. And it's a wealth inequity. This wealth inequity is continuing to reduce trust, both from a corporate perspective as well as from a supplier perspective. It is causing social conflict. We've seen this over the course of the past year, almost 2 years now. And people are creating continuous inaccurate assumptions about what we should or what we shouldn't be doing to help our communities thrive. I like to say that this is the reason why we exist as organizations, but I'm not sure. And so I want to start the conversation with first saying, what do you all think? Do you all think this is the reason why we're here to create wealth parity? Do you think we're here to do something else? And if so, what is it? And Val, Stan, Terrence, jump right in.
Well, I'll start. I think, and this network has been in existence now for just about 50 years, and you know where we were in 1972 and where we are in 2021, with some changes, but for the aggregate, has not changed a tremendous amount. Um, we still have a lot of the businesses that we deal with that are very small and have difficulties as far as accessing capital, accessing information. And when I mean accessing information, accessing good information. A lot of times a lot of our business owners get information secondhand, and it's not usually what's really going on. Being in the room, we're still, by and large, not in the room when the deals are being cut. We're usually in the room, if we even find where the room is, it's usually after the deal's been cut and we get whatever's left. where we need to be. And, the purpose of what we're supposed to be doing is, at least from my viewpoint, is growing and developing minority businesses. And, by and large, we grow and develop some that have already grown and developed to a certain extent. But a lot of the businesses that we deal with, at least if we're talking about the connection with our corporate members, most of them are too small to be in a position to connect. And so therefore, their growth is stymied because they aren't of the level where they can work on their business, not in their business. So what is it that we should be doing? We should be doing everything we can do to help these businesses, because these businesses are the ones that expand and enlarge communities, open up economic opportunities for people who haven't had them, and contribute to the larger economy. But by and large, what we do is we almost have like two programs. We have a program for those that are of a certain size and heft, and then for everybody else. But the everybody else is probably 70, 80% of the people that have a business in this country. And those folks are the ones that need the most guidance, most assistance, and the most opportunity to have an opportunity.
And that requires the most work.
And that requires the most work. And that requires that somebody and some bodies are willing to do the work that's necessary to bring these businesses to the level where they are able to compete and have opportunities that larger businesses in their industry and others have.
You guys, I don't disagree with you at all. And the question was, what are we supposed to do? What are we in this for? And interestingly enough, there could be a lot of reasons, and I think that's probably part of our dilemma, right? There are so many issues related to minority economic wealth gaps. There are so many issues related to utilizing minority businesses in the private corporate setting. A ton of issues: size, scale, capacity, capabilities. All those issues are there. That on the other side, whether the buyers really even want to use minority-owned businesses. So there's a ton of those issues out there, and I think that's part of our dilemma. Do we try to solve every single one of those as an organization, or do we pick our battles? And I don't have the total answer. But I found in my life anyway, in my business life, and how we approach this is we try to focus. We try to focus on a couple of things that we can work with and that we have the capability to do. We focus on opportunities. So I don't assume that every MBE that I work with is unable to do business. It doesn't have the capability, doesn't have the capacity, doesn't have the mindset to do business in the corporate world. I assume just the opposite. I assume that they can. And we work with them on opportunity. Yes, there are going to be ways that we can encourage and help and move those minority businesses forward. But my whole point is, and what I work with my organization on, is focus on a few major things to see if we can move that needle to minimize that wealth gap.
So here's a different question, and we're going to move past talking about what our organizations do. When you look at supplier diversity and maybe what is designed or to try to solve, is the current business case around supplier diversity valid? Why or why not? I'm bringing it up because, as Terrence just brought up, or just got through sharing, there are a lot of similarities about what is going on today that took place almost 50 years ago. And um, is the argument the same, or are there new tactics or new approaches that we should be, investigating or trying to take advantage of to enable not an organization, the concept of supplier diversity, to advance where more people know what is designed to do? Because I'm surprised about how many people I interact with in large and small organizations. They don't even know what supplier diversity is.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I really wonder who, and again, this is above just an organization. What is the message that we should be communicating as to why this concept even should exist? I'm gonna leave it there. And Val, chime in. This is
Well, so I want to answer that, but I want to also go just really quickly back to our last question. First of all, I think that our view of how this works is too narrow because we are such a lens towards the larger buying institution that we forget that there are verticals inside of the supply chain where we can integrate smaller businesses for growth opportunities.
mm,
You don't have to come in with the banner, the marquee company at the top of the skyscraper, because the supplier that's supporting that marquee company needs your services probably more so than the marquee company does. And so we forget that in our work, and we get so tunnel visioned on getting the big deal that's not necessarily the best deal, because the big deal doesn't necessarily have the best margins. And we don't talk enough about what the profit is on a deal versus what a deal is for the sake of having a deal. So there's that part of it. And
mhm,
then when you talk about, what is it about supplier diversity? First of all, the language needs to change. We have gotten stuck in this rut of talking about diversity. And for us, very specifically, diversity means ethnic minority businesses.
right.
And that's not to exclude, eliminate, or disregard others, but this is our lane, and our lens should be narrowly focused on the ethnic minority businesses that we support and serve, because we need to drive impact with those businesses. We don't have 333 years. I know I don't have 333 years. Maybe good 30, but not 330. And I don't want to hand this off to the next generation in this way. I don't want 50 years more to have to go by to grow incrementally. And so we need to be talking about the language of economic impact and opportunity. We need to be talking about sustainability. We need to be talking about community integration. Um,
Mhm,
you know, all the things we don't talk about when we talk about supplier diversity, because we talk about procurement. And
mhm.
that's literally where it lands like a thud.
Stan, Karen.
And you started off with the business case, right? And you referred to way back when in the 70s when it got formalized. Well, back then, really, the argument was a moral argument, wasn't it?
Yep.
Right? It was a moral argument, and that don't work anymore. I don't know that it ever worked, but it sure the heck doesn't work now. So yes, I believe that those enlightened folks in this space are really talking about the economic impact argument and the wealth creation argument that supports minimizing that wealth gap.
Mhm,
Those are the important reasons that you should be talking and using a business case for supplier diversity. Even though that I agree with Valerie on the term, it doesn't identify what we're talking about. We're talking about those minority firms, right? Those minority ethnic minority firms that we represent, and when we do that, and utilize the fact that they'll be able to, if they're given business, if they earn the business, and change that wealth gap, they'll then be able to buy you, corporate member, your goods and your services. And I think that changes the dynamic significantly. They get it then, because then there's a positive benefit for those corporate buyers when you talk that way.
So Terrence, were you about to say something? Because
I'll go back and edit it in a different way. You know, in our organizations, we've seen over the last maybe since, let's just put it bluntly, since May 25th, 2020, when George Floyd was killed, all of a sudden corporations that had absolutely no interest in supplier diversity or diversity, period, all of a sudden people got enlightened and decided that this was something they wanted to do. And it comes back to a few things. Number one, and something that always bothered me is the whole word minority. Because when you're talking about minority, a lot of people look at it from a standpoint as minority equals inferior. So there's a mindset change that has to take place before you can even talk about whether you're going to put people in supply chain, because more times than none, we deal with supplier diversity professionals, through our network. But the people that buy stuff are not the supplier diversity professionals. It's procurement people, the CPO, then has to turn that to the CFO. So if this is not something that organizations feel should be part of their business plan, and this comes from the top, then, more than likely, this becomes, what they call in college basketball, a one and done. I do this for a year, the heat gets off, and I go back to doing what I do. I think that, and here's the difficulty with that. The difficulty with that is it's very hard. It's not impossible. It's very hard to change the mindset of somebody. If I like you, I like you. If I don't like you, I don't like you. If I have a preconceived notion of who you are and what you're about, we can have all the supplier diversity programs in the world. Ain't going to change. Only way it may change is if it gets mandated from the CEO, CFO, COO. And then it's something that also gets counted as part of somebody's job description. But if it's not that, at least in my opinion, if it's not that, then it's, a lot of times what it is this sounds good, this looks good, this shows we're a good corporate citizen, but are we really invested in trying to help these businesses get to the point where they become part of our supply chain? In some cases, you have people who are dedicated throughout the organization, and that happens. In many cases, it doesn't happen, because you may have that supplier diversity person who may be, think this is something that needs to happen, it's a good idea and so forth, but has no real commitment from the other people within the organization. So until you get to that point, a lot of times you end up sending people through the motions of trying to introduce them to this one and that one and the other one, and nothing comes out of it, which leaves them what? Frustrated. And they say, oh, here's another one of these programs that don't go nowhere. So for me, what I've seen, I've been doing this kind of work, let's just say over 30 years. Unless you get to that point where you have a real commitment throughout the organization and people get past what their preconceived notions are of minority businesses and minorities, it's going to be difficult, and it may end up being what Valerie was talking about that Michelle had put in her study. This may end up taking 333 years, of which I sincerely hope not, because unlike y'all that may have 30 or whatever, I may have a good 10, something like that.
We're not receiving that.
But the thing is, it's got to get past that point.
Well,
And
so
if it doesn't get past that, I don't know.
that's the reason why we're talking. We're talking about what we would need to do to push to make that happen. So I want to go back to something that both Val and Stan have pointed out. So we talked about this conversation about economic impact. Stan, you talked about what the sales opportunity is for a corporation by supporting diverse or historically underutilized ethnic minority business. This is my opinion. I do not think we spend enough time talking about the economic benefit to all, not just to ethnic minorities.
Right.
It is to all when it is, and this is just a tactic to improve our national economy and our communities. It's just one tactic that we have not been able to optimize. Now, part of the reason why we haven't been able to optimize it is what you just said, Terrence. The preconceived notions about what ethnic minority is and why that exists, and blah, blah, blah. But if there's a way of changing it, and in my opinion, I think one of the best ways of changing people's perspectives is when they see the dollars and cents and the benefit they can receive from it. And we don't show the connection. We do, this is again my opinion. I don't think we show the connection to the greater society of why what we're doing helps them.
Right.
And that's the impact. I mean, we don't drive that narrative. We are not in those conversations where we are demonstrating, to your point, the broader impact. So when we say community, and Al, you know this, you led, and and the MSDC was a part of the 1% shift. When we started talking about how we shift dollars back into the community, these the businesses we support, the businesses we're talking about, are not islands. They are a part of a larger community. They contribute to the overall stability, health, wealth, um, tax base of a broader community.
Yep.
But we segment. We are the businesses that we are in support of. They're treated as a standalone, as if they're not integrated into the broader community. The green dollar is going to circulate back into the community, and it's not going to say, oh, well, you weren't associated with this ethnic minority business, so we're going to jump over your business. If I go to the supermarket and the supermarket is in my community, that's supporting jobs in my communities, that's supporting the vendors whose products are on the shelves of that supermarket. My dollar that is earned inside of a ethnic, historically underutilized business is circulating back into that broader economy. We do not make that direct connection.
I agree with that.
We don't. And we concentrate, which is our business, don't get me wrong, we concentrate in the space of procurement and supply chain, but we don't talk about what that means to the larger economy, to the impact. That's why impact studies are important. We've got to deliver that data that is showing this, and also not only showing the impact to the supply chain and the broader community, but what other smaller businesses are our businesses bringing along? Who of the businesses that we support are using smaller accounting firms, uh, uh, maintenance companies, nail salons, barbershops, all the companies, all the restaurants who, my business is located in a commercial quarter inside of an urban community. I'm going to a local establishment for lunch. That's supporting jobs of that local establishment that may be owned by another historically underutilized business. We don't create the relationships that exist inside of our ecosystem.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Different question for you all. Is spending $100 million with one supplier the same Does it have the same amount of impact? Does it have the same amount of value to the community as spending $10 million with 10 suppliers? If so, why? If not, why? From your perspective.
Let me jump on that.
Go ahead.
It's my feeling that you can impact more, a broader, let me put it that way, have a broader impact with 10 at 10 million. And the reason for that is that they're going to be different. They're going to have different impacts. They may have so much larger impact in terms of hiring within their community, in spending within their community, in changing the dynamic of that particular business than a single $100 million event for an MBE. So we would really push to try to work with carving it up and doing 10 of 10 million out of that $100 million contract.
And, I agree with Stan. When you can impact 10 businesses, that could be 10 sets of businesses in different industries where new jobs are being created, where perhaps 10 businesses may need new credit lines. So therefore, there's more business that's being done with the banking industry, or more business that's being done with marketing firms, and more impact on the community as a whole. And those things, I think, are much more important than one business getting 100 million, even though that's a nice thing for that one business. But when you can get 10 businesses, as Stan mentioned, in different industries where different people can hopefully benefit from that, and then hopefully those 10 businesses can benefit maybe 10 more. Now you're starting to get the impact that Valerie and you, Al, were talking about, that then leads to broader economic and community development.
So it's funny how when you look at different industries, and I'll use one industry in particular, the sales industry, and when you hear about the pyramid marketing schemes and how much wealth is created when you start interacting with multiple lines of people versus like one vertical, and how many different people benefit from it, it almost seems surprising to me that when we have a conversation about how we really want to build wealth, we don't see that as a model to work around or to mimic. People do it. People have been doing it for years. Been making tons of money doing it for years. But when we look at this model around supporting ethnic minority businesses, everybody's got to be big. And if they're not big, then we don't want to deal with them.
Right.
Well, first of all, Al, you know why we don't. We gotta change again. Everything's about language and perception. So,
right.
It's not the model, it's the name. We get rid of the pyramid marketing strategy,
That's right.
and we create, a building block strategy. Something. Again, terminology changes everything, because now you're opening someone's mind. How you present something to someone will determine how they receive it.
That's right.
And so language is everything. We know that. That's marketing 101. Is language is everything. And the other piece of it is that we've been sold as a society that the bigger you are, the better it is. Like, so you got to be big. The only way you're good is if you're big. But we know that we have business owners that we deal with every day that are intentionally small because they're efficient and they're more profitable. Because big doesn't mean solvent. You can be leveraged to the hilt as a big company.
That's right.
And be a small niche boutique, as Dr. Amanda Kemp has suggested, company, and be extremely profitable, and your margins be more attractive to the bank than a big company that's over leveraged.
Mm-hmm.
It's about mindset, and it's about how do we really help people understand what this is about. You want to build wealth. Big doesn't necessarily make you wealthier. It just gets you more things on your bottom line.
So,
I stopped because I heard Terrence and Stan both kind of look like they wanted to
oh, they were
jump in.
leaning in. They
Yeah,
were
they were
leaning in
leaning.
like they normally do. Okay, well, we're gonna let them lean in. Then.
The only comment that I have is the concept of wealth, right? There's making the business owner wealthy,
Mm-hmm.
which is okay. If I was a business owner, that's what I would like. I think the better, broader concept is to make that business wealthy, because we all know that historically minority owners hire more minorities and they spend in that community. So if we can share that wealth across that business, that's in my mind the ideal. That's the ideal.
That's
That's where you create wealth.
the spirit of what it is we do, right? Or
Exactly.
what we should be
Exactly.
doing.
But that gets lost. I think that gets lost in the chatter. What really, frankly, with MBEs that we deal with and corporate buyers that we deal with, what we're trying to do is create a broad base of wealth and knowledge and capabilities with our businesses, with our minority businesses. So that was the only comment that I wanted to make.
Terrence, were you gonna
No,
say?
all I was going to say, and I agree with all that's been said, is the more that we can spread this, and the more people that get it, that understand it, and are willing to participate in it, I mean, the better it is for society in general. Certainly, it
Exactly.
expands the tax base, which helps other people that aren't involved in those particular businesses, schools and roadways, and all the things that we all know that we need to be able to be functionally efficient in this country. And what you begin to do is you begin to slowly but surely cut that underclass of people that exist in this country, and start to open up opportunities for people where opportunities right now are scant or don't exist. And the perfect example of that, with all the different things that we have going on in this country, we have a set of people who have no access to the internet in a variety of places throughout this country. And that was shown last year when school had to go virtual.
That's right.
We had to go and find computer equipment and move people around so they could do their homework. So, in a country with this kind of wealth, those kind of things should never happen. But we have businesses that can help to do that, given the chance and the opportunity in those communities where things such as what we consider very basic, which is internet access, don't exist. So if you look at it from that standpoint and it spreads, then you kind of begin to negate that whole underclass that's talked about and that we all see every day in cities and rural areas throughout this country. And we have a lot of businesses that we all deal with, and many that we don't deal with, that can provide these kind of services and goods if given a chance.
And so, Val, you brought up this term, and I'm in agreement, and I find that we're already using it a little differently right now. But I'm kind of curious to hear everyone else's thought. All right, so we used to use the word diversity. We all kind of agree that the impression of the word minority may give off a negative connotation to some. And now the buzzword that people are starting to use, including myself, is historically underutilized. If we use that term more in identifying the group or the population that we are interacting with, how does that help us further our argument when you when you look at all the different categories under supplier diversity, that it becomes clear the segment of the population that we are really trying to help create wealth with and why it's important. So I'm going to stop right there and see if anyone can chime in. It would the term of using historically underutilized now, and maybe why that may be good, why that may not be bad, why that may not be good. I'm just curious to hear what you all think about that.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, historically underutilized is a term that's been used in the federal government space for years, and they zone it, so they hub zone it.
That's right.
The dilemma with that is that doesn't necessarily include only ethnic minorities. It could be any group of citizens or individuals that are in a that can classify themselves as historically underutilized, and there's the dilemma there. It's the larger dilemma, and it's labels.
And I agree, Stan, because, the pushback to that dilemma is, well, we have the same dilemma with the word diversity.
Yep.
We have that exact same dilemma when we know, historically, no pun intended, that, this was, programs that we're talking about were created specifically for Black and Brown. And that, that's 50, and that was 20, 25 years before any other group came onto the scene and began to fall under the diversity umbrella. And so we have, to your point, and this is where I'm going to land and stop, I agree with you. It's the word, it's the labeling. It's the labeling that creates the complication.
Is there Terrence?
Yeah, no, I was going to say, labeling is an issue in this country about a lot of things, unfortunately. But I don't know what we would call it, but I know what we need to stop calling it. We need to stop calling it minority, at least in my opinion, because anytime, in talking to people who are not minority, and when you use the term, you can automatically see, and in talking to people, when they're not on camera or on their company time, which is when you really find out what's going on, you can kind of see when, their viewpoints a lot of times are, this is, a person that we're giving a handout to, or this is somebody that's inferior. And, no matter, as I said before, no matter what you say, we want to say, once people have that mindset, it's very hard to change. It's very hard to say all of a sudden, I'm going to look at you just like I look at any other person or any other business if I've looked at you for the most of my life as somebody who's less than I am. So I don't know what phrase we would use to categorize the business owners that we work with, but if we can find something that covers who we work with and what their opportunities are or their representation is without using the word minority. And, I know people throw around the word diverse a lot, and diverse seems to cover everybody except white men.
Cisgender.
That would be a better thing for me, because like I said, the conversations I've had with, people within our network, people outside of our network, and, when you tell them, hey, I represent minority businesses, you can kind of see, I've seen it a number of times, kind of the face changes. Oh, it's kind of like, oh, really? Oh, that's nice. But is it taken as, that's serious? I mean, if I have an IT firm and I'm a minority and there's another IT firm that's not a minority-owned business, and they're offering the same services, but not looked at the same way, therein is kind of, to me, the issue when I say, okay, this is a minority business. First thing a lot of folks, and they don't want to talk about it, will say is, oh, they're looking for a handout of some sort. And that to me has to change. That's a hard thing to change. Like I said, I don't know what we would use as a title, but to me, this all goes back to a mindset, and a mindset's the hardest thing to change. Without us really coming up with a cohesive and collaborative way to show that the people that we represent can do the same business at the same level, and in many cases better than those that are not in the group that we represent.
But you know what, Terrence? I think that argument is a dated argument. I think
we deal with dated people.
Oh, okay, all right. Point taken. Point taken. But it's different when we're having a conversation with them, not about comparing them to a non-minority supplier, helping them see the overall benefit that everyone is experiencing from working with the segment of the business population that we support. Because you know, I know how I respond when someone wants to compare me against someone else. So now when we start talking about it from a business perspective, it's very hard. You said it earlier. You like who you like. You do business with the people you like. You interact with the people you like. However, people make business decisions when they see economic benefits that we do not do a good job of communicating. When we
I agree we don't. And I agree that we don't. And that's why, for people to have that kind of openness and understanding, that's why you need somebody that's in the C-suite to see that. Because those are generally the people who understand this from an economic standpoint. Right, and who look at it from the standpoint of, hey, we need to make money. And if these folks can help us make some money, I'm down with it. But that's what you need.
That leads me to something. That leads me to the next question.
Mm-hmm.
Stan brought this up, and I'm not attacking you, Stan. I'm not attacking you. just know that. I am attacking this concept because I have yet to see one person prove that this is the case. The assumption is that by doing business with a large group of ethnic minorities, you create a preference, a brand preference, and therefore it recirculates back into the sales cycle of a large corporation. Is there an instance that you can state that you know that has occurred? And if it is, please tell me, because that is how we demonstrate the economic benefit to these corporations.
So you used my name, so I'm gonna respond, and I want to try to link what you just said to what Terrence just said. For years, we've been trying to do this business by pushing up into the corporation, and we haven't been as successful as we want to be pushing up. So yes, there are instances where it becomes part of that culture, but I believe that those organizations that I've seen that it's part of their culture is because it was created from the top down.
Yeah.
And I think there is the obvious solution. It's hard. It's hard to find the C-suite executive or executives in an organization to interact with them enough to get them on board and implement that concept in their organization for whatever the reasons are. The moral reason, the I want to be a good corporate citizen reason, or the economic reason. Once that happens, it does become part of that culture within that organization. And we've seen what happens then. Opportunities increase, wealth gets more created because more and more diverse organizations are embedded in that particular company.
So I half agree. Um, and the reason why is because we're going to go back to May 25th, and we're going to go back to the last summer, when we saw all these corporations come out and pledge that Black Lives Matters, and they were putting money behind helping diverse businesses. And there were all these corporate statements around DEI and inclusion and supplier diversity. And what we know is that there's all this money out there in the universe that the CEOs committed billions of dollars, not millions, billions of dollars that have been committed that are still languishing out in the universe, because while you get the CEO, this top commitment, there's not a replicable process to get it down through the organization and then out to the businesses that it needs to touch. And it's whether it's the process of engagement, whether it's the process of funding. You can talk about $49 billion that has been pledged, and only $3 billion has been deployed. So what's happening? What's the holdup? Why is there that much problem? So that's why I say I half agree.
Right.
Top down matters.
Right.
Like top down matters, but there's got to be the institutional mechanism inside to make that top down message, because as the CEO, you're driving it through your messaging, but you're not the action. You're not acting on it on a daily basis.
Well, Valerie, though, I think you incorporated those two elements in that discussion you just had. I think that there's a huge difference between pledging and committing. And those organizations that you talked about, and there are a ton of them out there, they pledged $1.50 or $10 or whatever it was. They didn't commit to do it, and they didn't commit to have it accomplished within their organization. I see that as the distinction. So I use the auto industry. That's a good example. For whatever their reasons, it's within their organization.
With the commitment.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
They committed, and it's an ongoing commitment through CEO after CEO after CEO. That is a model. And how do we get that model across corporate America?
There you go. And that's what I was going to say. So how do we replicate it? How do we take a model that you pointed to one? And that's what Al's initial question was. What is that? Show us the model. So we have a model that we know works and has been demonstratively replicated for decades. It's not a one-off. It didn't just start up 5 years ago. This is decades of intentional commitment. How do we take that model and replicate it across corporate America? What do we do? How is that done?
Wait a minute, that's a question, Stan.
Oh, don't look at me. I don't know. You know what we use? We've been. I wish we could use it more. I wish I had the connections to use it more. And that's a CEO corporate champion.
Yeah.
And if we can get that kind of I don't know what the term would be. That number of
influencers,
corporate
influencers, corporate
exactly
influencers.
to be committed to work with us in that changes the dynamic.
Yeah, it does. And one of the things that's been done, to some extent in New York City in the public sector with the New York City controller is he has pushed for diversity on the companies that do business with New York City's controller's office through their board. So if you're going to get an influencer or influencers, maybe you need to change who sits on the boards of these companies, because I will tell you, the CEO, the CFO, the CEO, they all go to the board meetings, and they do, we're all CEOs, so we know one thing is you don't want to go to a board meeting and have somebody ask a question you don't have an answer for.
That's true.
Okay, that's a great way to be unemployed. So I think that if you really want to get an influencer, you need to change some of the boards of some of these larger companies and have a more diverse board where somebody, and it's not a token one person, but a couple of people on the board, where somebody is asking about this that we're talking about now. Somebody that understands what this is and brings this up at board meetings.
So Terrence, I gotta chime in on this because like Val half agreed with Stan, I half agree with you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let me tell you why. I'm not attacking you. I'm just.
It just sounds like it. It just sounds like it.
I think there is an assumption, and this is going to lead to my next question, but I want to bring it up right now. The assumption is just because someone is diverse, sitting in a position of leadership, they have that understanding, that desire, and that interest to create change. And I don't necessarily believe that's the case in all instances.
It may not be the case. And, and I agree with you. It may not, because a lot of times you have somebody that's there, you're just so happy to be there and happy to be at the meeting that they ain't saying anything at the meeting.
That's right.
But once you find if there are people on that board, then it's maybe incumbent upon people like us to put pressure on people like them.
Yeah.
To get them to talk about the fact that, these are things that need to be brought up at these board meetings at your company. We have a massive, a fairly good sized network. There's a lot of things we just, as a cohesive group, need to do and don't do.
I agree.
And we don't know maybe the power that we all have together.
That's right.
Because we got to still work to come together to have a cohesive message to bring out to people.
That's right.
And this is one of the things I think we can bring out to people. So if you're going to put, a brown or black person on the board, and then we need to know who these people are, and we need to be able to come to with a message to them as to why what we do and why the inclusion of historically underutilized businesses is important in the economy of this country, which then is important to that company, because that company, more than likely, most of our corporate members are publicly traded. So what's important to them? Most importantly is stockholder value. Stockholder value goes up when your bottom line goes up. If we can get those connections and get in a room and start to talk about those kinds of things, then Al, what you're talking about as far as really making an impact begins to take shape. It's not going to be a short process or an easy process. But I think the first process is for all of us to come together, find out who these people are, if there are some, press some of these companies to do this. And that's where you get from people pledging, like Stan was talking about, to a commitment. But it takes time, and it takes a unified message, and it's going to take us probably to deliver it.
So Al, what I'm going to say is we both half agreed, and then we were both brought forward because what Stan and Terrence landed on were the two most important piece. Well, I've been talking about language, commitment, and accountability. Because it's commitment with accountability. Without the accountability around the commitment is just a pledge.
That's right. That's a very good distinction.
And so that's where we've landed. And so to Terrence's point, we need to be more in tune to not only who's leading these organizations from the C-suite, but who's making the board decisions that influence the leadership at the C-suite level. But then we also need to be inside the Beltway at the tables for advocating on behalf, because the business policies that come out of the Beltway are going to influence. Oh, so I'm sorry, anybody who's not inside the Beltway might not know that's out of Washington, D.C. I saw that glare, Al.
I'm down here in the lower part near the Mississippi. Beltway When you said the Gulf, I know what you're talking about.
My apologies. My apologies.
Thank you.
I saw the glaze though. I'm not. But anyone who's inside of DC quarters, those business policies that come out of DC are going to influence C-suite commitment and accountability from the boards. And
Yeah.
so we need to also be in those rooms and at those tables influencing policies that are favorable for businesses that are not only the ones we represent, historically underutilized businesses, but also business policies that support inclusive commitment and accountability around engagement with those businesses.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to be at those tables, and that is something that those are conversations we've not been having. And so it's critically important that we leverage, and this is advocacy, not lobbying. So I'm going to be really clear, make sure, the IRS and, keep our 501c3s protected. This is advocacy, not lobbying, but making sure that our businesses are, the businesses and the business policies that support our businesses are a part of the decisions that are coming out of Washington, D.C.
Different question for you all. And this is part B to my well, I'm going to go ahead and say, like you said, I'm consenting now to my esteemed colleague's viewpoint. So here's the second part to it. We spend a lot of time trying to help business owners that are part of our segment of the population that we support create wealth. What do we do, or what should we be asking of them to keep the spirit of what it is we're doing live, where we can see greater influence and impact in the communities that everyone's operating in?
Well, they've got to pay it forward. They've got to pay it forward, not only in 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 having in utilizing other businesses, but also in training and developing the next generation of workforce and leaders inside of their organizations and in their industries. One of the things I have one of our MBEs has been on us to make the connection to the school district, because they want to train inside of the Philadelphia school district young people in technology that is specific to their industry, because they see that as being a growth segment, a career path. And so they've got to pay it forward. And we've got to hold them accountable too. It can't just be that we want to be beneficiaries of the work that is being done, but that they're also taking their rewards, their growth, and utilizing it and pushing it back into the community.
Mm-hmm.
And I think most are, but we need to be more intentional about how that is happening.
I agree. And, I think the other, one part to expand on what, Valerie has mentioned, is that people got to communicate what's going on. Because a lot of times, you don't hear about some of the good things that people are doing as their businesses grow and develop. Because people feel, maybe I shouldn't talk about it because I might be putting a spotlight on myself that I really don't want. Sometimes, depending on who you're doing business with, they may not want you to talk about it. But I think that, one of the things that we've got to make sure people do is communicate, not just communicate the bad and the indifferent, but communicate the good. The things that are happening that you think can be beneficial, that have been beneficial to your business and can be beneficial to other business owners. And it kind of ties in with the pay it forward that Valerie was talking about, so that people can, people learn from each other's, the good things that happen to them and the not so good things that happen to them. Mm-hmm. But I think one thing we got to make sure is that we communicate this, and we do it between, within the network, outside the network, but business to business. So people get to learn. Most of us brown and black folks were not born in a household where there was a business owner. So a lot of us learn business on the fly. And, you know, and I notice when we have events and you have MBEs that get up and talk about different things that relate to their business, you can see kind of the intense look on other folks' faces as they're saying, hey, that happened to me too. You know, so it's those kinds of things. We can learn a lot from each other if we open up the avenues of communication and tell our story, good, bad, and indifferent. Not just when it's bad, but when it's also good, that people can learn from.
So we represent a number of MBEs and corporate members in 4 states. So a bunch of different markets. And what I've found is that we have very influential corporate members, and we also have very influential minority business owners in their respective worlds, whether it's their industries or whether it's in their communities. And we don't tap that to the extent that we could for the community.
Yep.
Now, some of it is us, our organization, and then some of it is I think the big deal is, and I hear it all the time, whether it's a corporate member or an MBE, asking, well, how can I help? What is it that you want me to do? And we're not real clear in what that is. It used to be, send me $1. I need money. Send me money. And that's not all of it. It's trying to figure out within our own little hemisphere how each of us can help each other. And we don't do a very good job of that. I realize that, and that's one of the focuses that I want our organization to work on. And I wish we could do that across our network of organizations. We've said it, how many times have we said it? There's all kinds of strength within our network. We just, number one, we don't know all of it because we don't have that communication and that capability to understand all of it. And we haven't harnessed it to figure out how best to achieve our common goals. And darn it, we ought to figure it out.
I'm in agreement.
So Al, can I ask the question?
Yes, ma'am.
Because it's been this conversation is so robust, and I'm happy we're having it. I like for each of us to think of our keynote talked about our dare, and she took a year of doing something different to rebuild her life. And I want to know, what is our one thing that we each can commit to with some accountability?
Not pledge.
Not commit, but commit with accountability.
Okay.
To carry forward, to keep, number one, to make this conversation have life and have action behind it, so that we keep moving it forward. What would be your one thing that you could do? And okay. I'm going to go first.
I'm gonna start because I already have mine. Right. So Val already knows, and some of you already know, that I have an economic impact tool that does all of this kind of work in real time. I am willing to commit to help this story and to help this argument and help this conversation to all of my colleagues at cost, which is pennies on the dollar for you all. I just need to cover my costs. I'm concerned about covering my costs. To help frame the story, help frame the argument, because I agree with you, Stan. We have way too much social, as well as political, as well as actual capital that we all collectively have access to, that we are not harnessing for the good of this concept of creating economic parity. That's mine, Val.
That's yours?
That's mine.
All right, so my one thing is going to be around advocacy. And my one thing is going to be helping to drive from our network an advocacy platform that we can come up with three priorities from an advocacy standpoint that can be acted upon at the federal, state, and local level across our network.
I like it. I'm gonna sign up for that. I need that help.
I'm cheating a little. I do have a consultant that's gonna help. She don't know that. That's now part of her, but that's mine.
Oh, Stan's got that look. He's about
So
to
yeah,
lean in.
I mean, I stumbled upon it during this conversation, but I want to commit that within our network, that I do some outreach. I'd like us to find those one or two or three or whatever that critical mass is of corporate champions that we might be able to put together and help us achieve what we've been talking about this entire presentation.
I like that.
So that leaves me.
Hey,
And
this was an ask you weren't prepared for. I wasn't prepared for this either. Boss sprung this on everybody.
I'm good because mine is more geared toward the MBEs. And my commitment is to continue and not to quit working with MBEs to help them develop the capacity and skills necessary so people can stop saying that they don't have the capacity and skills to do the work that they do. That's my commitment.
That's real talk. I like it.
Are there any other questions that anyone else wants to bring to fore? I know you had one other question around ESG, Al, and I think you should bring that forward because I think that's an important question.
All right, so here's my final question for you all. All right, so when we take into account the new buzzword or the new perspective, which is ESG, environmental, social, and governance. All these large organizations have new ESG initiatives that are actually being driven by their stockholders, saying these are things that we are concerned about. We want to know how you all are managing your operations based upon these strategic initiatives. Do you all view this as a hindrance or a benefit to what it is that we're trying to do in supporting our ethnic minority constituents?
Well, I'll jump in, I guess. I see it as just additional chatter. I don't know who the person is that comes up with all these acronyms. So you got DE&I, you've got ES&G.
LMNOP?
Well, yeah, and all it does, in my mind, is it dilutes what we're trying to do. They never satisfied the issue that we've talked about. It's not been satisfied yet. So we don't know what to do with it. Let's put it over here in a new ESG format. So I don't think it helps at all. I think it just moves us around because what's the term? Never mind. But you know where I'm going.
Yeah.
So let me say it this way. I don't necessarily fall in line with ESG, but I do think that we cannot, from a corporate standpoint,
ignore it.
So we can't ignore particularly the environmental and social impact. What we know, and we've seen this with the storms that have raged across, the southern portions of the state, the tornadoes that ravaged the Midwest, the fires that are damaging our western states, the Northeast. We know that climate is important. We also know that most of our businesses are not prepared for the impact that climate events have on their businesses. Secondarily, we know that this is important to the next generation of leaders and entrepreneurs that are coming from our business owners and from their families and from these communities. So we can't ignore it. We just have to own and frame the narrative and the initiative and action that is around it. Because the ESG is at a corporate level and it does not take into consideration the small business owner that is trying to recover, that is in the middle of a climate event, trying to, excuse me, in the middle of a pandemic, being faced with a climate event. I mean, it's one thing if you know a climate event happens and you can prepare, but you're already trying to recover from a pandemic, and then you have a climate event followed by another climate event. When I was in labor with my first child, I was having labor pains, and they called it coupling because it was back to back to back. And it must feel like that feeling of coupling where it just is never ending. But our businesses aren't necessarily prepared for that. So while we don't have to look at the ESG from the corporate government, from the corporate standpoint, we certainly need to be leading on it as we look at the work that we do with our businesses.
Terrence?
Well, I would say this. To me, it kind of harkens back to pledge, commitment, action. So the ESG, I consider, because it varies by company, I consider that a pledge. And what you then need to see is there actually a commitment and an action that goes with that pledge. As Stan had mentioned, there are all kind of acronyms. I can't even keep all this stuff in my head, what all these different things are. But to me, other than, they have these things, how does this affect their clients, our clients, this country, the environment in general? And what steps are you doing from an environmental, social, and governance standpoint to connect with what your CEO, CFO, whoever it is, made as a speech and said, this is our ESG program? I think right now, it's too early to say that, any of this stuff is actually connected. As Valerie mentioned, here in the Northeast, for the first time, well, probably in our case, since Superstorm Sandy, we had 2 storms in a matter of 3 weeks, which, people have flooded homes and, unfortunately, a number of people passed away. You look at that on top of a COVID-19 pandemic and on the bottom of an upcoming winter. And you're saying, well, how are all of these things going to affect their businesses, but also how it's going to affect our clients' businesses and the communities and neighborhoods that they live in? So, people have these programs and they've made, these statements and pledges. What I like to see is commitment, at least action.
Well, I want to clarify something, because I thought the question was, is it going to be helpful or detrimental to our messaging, the business that we're in? And that's what I meant. It's more clutter. It's important. There's no doubt about it. And the corporate members know that. That's why it's part of their programming for whatever it is. They have to be attentive to it. I get it. I get it. But it doesn't help the messaging from my perspective. That's that's all I meant.
I got you.
Well, Al, I know you have to depart, but I want to thank you for facilitating this fantastic conversation. I want to let everyone know, and I'm going to let you go, but I'm going to let everyone know we're going to keep the conversation going. Expect a third part to show your hand. Part 1 was at the SRMSDC Gateway Conference. Part 2 has been at ROAR. Part 3 is coming up in October, and everyone who joined today and in August will be invited to join the next conversation. I also want to open it up if there are any comments. I mean, not comments, no comments. I've seen a lot of comments, but if there's a question from the audience, we'll take 1 or 2 before we jump off. But Al, thank you so much. Be well, stay safe.
All right, you all take care. It's been a pleasure.
Take care.
All righty. Stan and Terrence, I'm going to have you hang around for another minute or 2. But thank you both so much for being a part of this important. I don't think we've ever talked like this publicly, candidly, um, as a group. I mean, we have our conversations in our meetings, but I don't even know that we've done this type of deeper dive amongst ourselves. So this has really been a great dialogue to get to know and to really debate and ideate, not even debate, but ideate around what we see as being the future. Do you, either one of you, have any closing thoughts before we leave? I don't see any questions, so I just want to know if you either one of you want to share any closing thoughts as we end this session.
I just want to thank you for inviting me. I thought it was a very interesting dialogue and discussion. So thank you.
And I echo Stan's comments. This was thank you, Valerie. I mean, this was a good and great for me opportunity to be able to talk about stuff that you don't really get to talk about because you're so involved in trying to get things done. A lot in over 50 years of what we've been in, many things have been done, but obviously, as we all know, many more things need to get done. And for us to get them done, we need cohesiveness. And, we can get in the room and debate everybody's viewpoints and the like, but we need to come out of the room with ideas and actions that are going to be beneficial to the clients that we have in the minority business enterprise community.
Well, I want to again thank you both. And I want to say to our audience, thank you. I've been reading the chats diligently as we have been having our discussion. This concludes the programming portion of Roar. Tomorrow is our matchmaking. Hopefully tonight, if you are in anywhere near Central PA or can get to Lancaster, you join us tonight at our pop-up reception at Telus. And if not, join us tomorrow in Wilmington, Delaware at the riverfront for our last pop-up reception, where you'll have an opportunity to meet the new president of NMSDC, Ying McGuire. I thank you all so much for joining us today. Be well, stay safe, and have an impact.